September meeting of the Audit and Accountability Committee. Mr. Deputy Auditor, could you please call the roll?
Absolutely. Mr. Ragland?
Here.
Ms. Beckerly?
Here.
Mr. Grant? Mr. Vajon?
Here.
Ms. Adair? Mr. Jordan? Mr. Jordan is here virtually.
Okay, so
Noted
Mr.
that.
Jordan will be a non-voting participant tonight. Thank you for joining us today, Mr. Jordan.
Hello.
And
Hello,
Mr.
thank you,
Daniel.
thank you. Sorry, thank you. My dad's been in the hospital, so I needed to be up here this evening.
Yes, sir. Understood. We are praying for you and your family.
Here.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. You do have a quorum, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Next, we will have the approval of the minutes from the meeting held earlier this month. Those were sent to you in a packet of information that you received last week. That meeting had taken place on September 2nd, 2021. Is there a motion to approve the minutes?
So moved.
Thank you. Is there a second?
Second.
All those in favor, please respond saying aye.
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 Any opposed? Motion carries. Thank you. Next, we will have the Office of Internal Audit report. And we will start off with our educational session, the 3 lines model overview.
And that will be Kevin Stanskowski from the Office of Internal Audit presenting that.
All right, welcome, Kevin. Good to have you.
Thank you very much. Can everybody hear me okay? And I guess I got to share the screen though. Let's see. Okay, how's that? Can everybody hear me okay and see the screen okay?
Yes, sir.
Fantastic. Thank you very much for this opportunity this afternoon. The Office of Internal Audit is pleased to make this presentation this afternoon. Just give you a little bit of a thumbnail of why we think it's relevant and why we're doing this presentation today. With the board's focus or movement towards a more enterprise risk management approach for the Columbus City Schools, we're hoping that the information in this presentation will serve as a resource and serve as a source of information as the board moves down that road and takes on those efforts of maybe moving towards a more enterprise risk management approach. Excuse me. So what are our objectives? What we're going to do is we're going to introduce the 3 lines model to those folks that are not familiar with it at all. And then for those folks that are in the audit area and audit industry, you likely already have some familiarity with the 3 lines model. So it'll be kind of a reintroduction to you folks. But for the new folks, this will maybe be the first time you see this model. And we'll go over what the model is intended to do and why it's relevant to enterprise risk management, as well as just to how the organization is structured and understanding folks' roles and responsibilities. So we'll introduce or reintroduce that 3 lines model. We'll identify the model's components. We'll identify the roles and responsibilities of each of those components. And then throughout the presentation, we'll try to offer some examples of departments or functions here within Columbus City Schools that serve within each of those roles. So first of all, you're probably asking, well, what is the 3 lines model? The 3 lines model is it's a principles-based model that was established by the Institute of Internal Auditors. It was previously called the 3 lines of defense. And then back in, I think it was the fall of 2020, they did some restructuring of it a little bit, changed some of the principles a little bit, and then they dropped the defense out of the title. So if you hear me refer to that, that is simply a carryover of my brain not being able to make that adjustment yet. But they actually refer to it as the 3 lines models, and it was developed by the Institute of Internal Auditors. The purpose of the model is it's designed to help organizations identify structures and processes that will assist them in achieving their organizational objectives, as well as facilitate strong governance and strong risk management activities. The model is best used or best carried out when everyone that is part of the model clearly understands their roles and responsibilities, and then how those relationships work among the different roles and the different components. We're going to be at a little higher level today and not dive too deep into the entire model or all the details of the model. This is really just to kind of introduce it to you, as well as kind of identify those roles and responsibilities that all of us play within this model. So this slide here represents the actual visual representation of the model. You have your organization, your governing body, which here obviously is the Board of Education. You have a management component, you have an internal audit component, and you have external assurance providers. And then you'll see that when we talk about first line, second line, and third lines, where those lines lay. The first and second lines lay within management. The third line lays within the Office of Internal Audit here at Columbus City Schools. And then these arrows are intended to represent kind of communication or reporting, the back and forth between the governing body and management, the governing body and internal audit, and then kind of the collaboration or the coordination that takes place between management and internal audit. You'll see down here these the up lines being for accountability and reporting back to the governing body, the down arrows from the governing body being the delegation or the direction and resources that are provided to these components. And then this arrow side to side is to represent the alignment, communication, coordination, and collaboration that's to take place in order to achieve the objectives desired by the governing body. So let's dive down into each of the individual components, keeping this in your this visual in mind, kind of diving down to each of the individual components. The first one being the governing body. The governing body's roles involve integrity, leadership, and transparency. And then here we list some of the specific types of roles and responsibilities that the governing board has. They're responsible for demonstrating accountability and oversight of the organization. They're responsible for transparently reporting to stakeholders and to external parties, as well as internally, the achievement of objectives. They're responsible for the organization's culture and the nurturing of a culture that fosters integrity, ethical behavior, and accountability. The governing body is also responsible for establishing the structure and process for governance, delegating responsibility, and providing resources. If you go back to this line, that is the downward arrow, this slide, the downward arrow of providing the direction, delegating responsibility, and the resources that management needs to carry out and achieve organizational objectives. They're also responsible for determining the organization's risk appetite and exercising oversight of the internal control, as well as oversight of compliance with expectations, whether those are legal compliance expectations, regulatory expectations, or ethical compliance expectations. And then finally, establishing and overseeing an independent, objective, and competent internal audit function. These are all the roles and responsibilities of the governing body. So if we move into, start diving into the management side of this equation, we start talking about the first and second lines that they have responsibility for. You find that the first line roles, those are your frontline managers that are responsible for the provision of services to students, to clients, to other stakeholders. They are those frontline folks that carry out the day-to-day responsibilities and are responsible for owning and managing the risk related to achieving objectives. So they're the ones that are in the trenches every day. They do that by leading and directing actions, by developing and applying the resources that are provided by the Board of Education. They maintain a dialogue with the Board of Education and report back to the board on their performance, as well as on outcomes, whether that's planned outcomes, actual outcomes, or expected outcomes. And they do that all in the context of organizational objectives and risk. As we said, the board will set those items, the organizational objectives, as well as the risk appetite, And then the first line is responsible for reporting back to management in that context on their performance. These folks also are responsible for establishing the structures and processes for managing the day-to-day operations and for managing the risks at their level. And that includes the implementation of internal controls. So again, they're the ones who develop the procedures for carrying out their day-to-day work, the processes that they build in order to effectively carry out their work. Those are the folks that are doing that in that first line role. They're also directly responsible for ensuring compliance with those expectations that the board has set. So they will develop structures and processes to ensure compliance, but they will also be they're the ones who are directly responsible for ensuring that compliance. So if you move on to management's second line role, and this is an interesting thing here at Columbus City Schools, is in that our second line role here at Columbus City Schools is not what they traditionally think of in this model. We found that the second line roles here at Columbus City Schools are a little more patchy in that you will find them in particular places throughout the district, but not really as part of an overall intentional effort to provide this second line role as it's expected or as it's kind of defined in this model. The purpose is to provide complementary expertise and support for that front line and those first line roles. You know, you have a kind of a backup set of folks that are experts in the provision of the service or experts in the compliance. So they're able to provide guidance and support to those frontline folks. And remember, this is still on the management side of the house. So this is still under that management component. As I mentioned, it's kind of a patchy effort here in Columbus City Schools, in that you find we have an area related to transportation compliance. We have, what was the other one I was thinking of? We do some in the accountability side. And so the other one is in legal services, we have some compliance related expertise related to either ADA or Section 504. And so we have some expertise and support, but again, it's kind of in patchy areas, and it's really knowledge specific as opposed to an organizational, intentional effort to provide those roles as a second line. But they provide that complementary expertise and support. They're also responsible for development and implement of continuous improvement for risk management practices. And that would be at all levels, whether it's at the process, system, and entity. So where you have those frontline folks that have developed those things, the second line would come along and say, well, how can we improve that? And how can we continuously improve that? And then they also provide analysis and reports on the adequacy and the effectiveness of risk management, including control. And now I'm going to move to the second line, and you're going to say likely to yourself is like, well, we have a third line, which is going to be the Office of Internal Audit. And how does that third line differentiate from a second line? Well, we'll differentiate it in a couple of different ways. But first, it's important to remember that again, this second line role is a management established role, okay? And part of this provide analysis and reports on adequacy and effectiveness is that they may go out and do some testing of their own or do some monitoring of their own of the first line management to see how they are doing when in conjunction with performance or in conjunction with expectations. They will go out and perform some of their own work and some of their own monitoring of the first line. And so that's where I think you're going to ask, well, what's the difference between that and the third line roles and what internal audit provides? Well, again, the big difference between the second line and the third line is the differentiation between internal audit and management and the independent assurance that comes along with the third line. The roles and responsibilities for the third line in the Office of Internal Audit is to maintain that independence, and so that we can provide that objective assurance back to the Board of Education on how the first and the second line are doing. You know, one of the advantages of having a second line is that they will be experts in their area, in their books of business and what it is they provide. They'll be able to do more frequent review and monitoring of their performance, as opposed to relying, say, on internal audit to provide that level of assurance. Internal audit doesn't have the resources to do that timely and frequently enough to provide a level of assurance to the Board of Education. And so we come through and with our resources would only periodically be able to touch particular areas. Again, that big difference being is that we provide independent and objective assurance back to the board on the other two lines. You know, one of our roles is also to support the achievement of organizational objectives. And that's where that line that goes back and forth with management on the model, you know, that's where we fill that role in that, you know, we're not just a check on the first and second lines. We're also here to support the achievement of the organizational objectives through either through the audit work or through consulting work or through advisory services that we can provide as those things are being built so that we can achieve the organizational objectives and promote that and facilitate that continuous improvement. And then you have your external assurance providers. If you think of those as really just any organization outside of the Columbus City Schools that will provide you assurance on your organizational objectives. If you think of like the Auditor of State's Office will provide assurance to satisfy legislative or regulatory requirements that protect stakeholder interests. The state law requires that the Columbus City Schools have an annual financial audit. Well, the Auditor of State's Office provides that audit. They provide that additional assurance to satisfy that legislative requirement. You can also think of it as perhaps the Ohio Department of Education that may come in and do periodic program reviews of specific things that they're interested in. You know, we gain additional assurance from those external providers through that work. And then there are also those external assurance providers that satisfy management or the board's request in order to complement the internal assurance sources that we have here in the Office of Internal Audit. Examples of those include the recent HR and transportation and curriculum reviews that were done by those external parties. They complement the internal assurance sources, but those are the external providers. So again, here in summary, here's the model, but what I want to do is I want to walk through just one instance, a particular instance that we've identified where each of these roles are uniquely or are specifically identified. And that is in the area of some behavior and attendance data recording. The school, your first line group is going to be your school building administrators. School building administrators have developed procedures and put procedures in place that they have to constantly record certain behavior and attendance actions that take place, and they have to record those constantly. And so they've developed a procedure in which they do that. Well, they also need to have a control in place. So they've established a control to make sure that that data is accurate because under certain provisions or certain circumstances, the behavior data and the attendance data has to agree. And so they've built in a control. Again, the first line responsible for building in procedures and processes as well as controls over those procedures and processes. They've built a control that a report is generated each day that says whether or not the data agrees. And if there are instances where the data that's supposed to agree doesn't, they show up on this report and then they're able to go and correct those instances timely. All right, so that's an instance of your first line roles. Well, the Office of Accountability has a group of folks that would do periodic reviews of that process and of those outcomes. And so they would periodically perform quarterly reviews of the behavior and the attendance data for selected schools to see how those schools were doing and to see whether or not they were complying with the expectations of getting that data corrected. And then they would also try to validate, they would validate the support for those decisions that were made by the frontline folks. And so you had a second line that was in place that would provide expertise and support, monitor through their quarterly review and challenge those items that needed to be challenged, whether or not the first line was providing the services the way they were supposed to. And then internal audit would come by and we would do an examination and do a test to give the Board of Education assurance that these first and second lines were conducting the roles the way they were supposed to conduct the roles. And so that was just intended to provide you with a specific example here at Columbus City Schools of the different roles and how those different roles interact. So again, this is the model. The intention of the model is just to provide everybody the roles and the responsibilities associated with those components of the model. And as we go forward in the area of enterprise risk management, kind of developing or designing our structures and such to keep this model in mind as we design and move forth in those efforts. So I'll take any questions you might have on that model.
Thank you, Kevin. I'd like to acknowledge the presence of committee member, Mr. Grant. Thank you for joining us, sir.
Hi, Mr. Grant.
You've heard the report. Are there any questions from any of the members of the committee on the report itself, or any comments around the three lines model? Yes, Co-Chair Beckerly.
Okay. So I'm trying to, well, I know, I think I understand this theoretically. And if we're adding, I think, because Kevin, you said kind of what prompted this is the move toward having our internal audit function to take on enterprise risk management. So would part of the process in the early stages be, I guess maybe addressing the patchiness? Like, so, I mean, are you proposing that if we adopt this approach that, and you just set forth an area where our organization is doing it well, and presumably there are areas where we're not as, we don't have it as tightly structured as it should be. Is that part of where then that would become the function of internal audit? To help make sure that we're consistent across all functions?
Well, the role of internal audit in enterprise risk management is to evaluate the organization's enterprise risk management activities. We would not be the ones leading those activities, just like any of the other audit activities we do. We're providing feedback, and so what I think I see our role in that would be to help the board and advise the board on information such as structure as the board pursues enterprise risk management. And so we would provide insight or advisory on the structure in line with this model or other enterprise risk management activities or concepts. This specific would be structured to this model and organizing the first and second line roles, defining those roles, educating folks on those roles, building them, advising on how to build them, best practice on how to build them. And again, just trying to provide that information, because we ultimately have to be able to say we're independent of that, whatever structure gets created and gets decided upon, so that we can then provide the board with the independent assurance services on essentially how well is it going.
Yeah, so I must have said something that I didn't mean to say. So I think that if I understand this correctly, part of the function of internal audit through this lens would be to identify the patchy spots and give feedback about that to the board, I guess. And then in turn, the board would ask the superintendent to bolster up or to patch it where the patchy isn't happening. And so as a result, we as a board could have more comfort that our entire organization is, it's not patchy anymore.
Well, yeah, that is, it's functioning as you
patchy.
desire. Well, but it's functioning and it's carrying out the things, the work as you desire as the board, and that's the achievement of the objectives you want. By putting such a structure like this in place with both the first and second line, and we are a little, we are a little weak on the second line. But by bolstering that second line or enhancing that second line, it then provides the Board of Education greater assurance on a day-to-day basis, on a routine, regular, frequent basis, because again, management is responsible for carrying out the everyday activities. The second line operates as kind of a check on the first line, and it doesn't have to wait for internal audit to get to that. By having that built-in second line within management, the governing body then has that assurance, or has that ability to sleep well at night, knowing that, okay, my first line is running really nice and tight, and I've also got a group that can support that first line and provide the expertise that they need, as well as check on them once in a while, so that we can address issues timely if any come up, and we have a good, strong, solid second line that is operating throughout your organization.
So if we were to elevate, now my mind is going in a few dangerous directions.
No, I got a question. I do have another question for Kevin myself.
Okay, if we were to elevate this second line function in our organization to kind of be really intentional about it and ask all our respective organizations, what is your second line? Who's doing it? How are you doing it? And get them to think about it. Does that also, or would that also facilitate communication? Because we hear as board members over and over again, nobody listens to us, right?
Yeah.
Is this also a mechanism that would kind of force, or not force, but maybe facilitate or provide a conduit of communication that might address that refrain?
I mean, it would provide another group of people, or it would provide another lens that could either, further support what the first line is saying or what another group is saying. It does provide a lens, a group of people that could support that, or I guess essentially dispute that as well, depending on the circumstance. But I mean, it does offer another viewpoint, yes.
And I guess what I'm thinking.
I'm sorry, I don't know if it actually facilitates communication, because communication will take place however it takes place. But I mean, it does offer another resource for communication of items back and forth to the board.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Vajon, did I see you had a question?
Well, Mr. Chairman, more so to add and contribute maybe to the discussion. I'm sorry, can everybody hear me with the mask? It's hard to.
Tough, I know.
So Kevin, I guess as I consume this, from my standpoint, I would look this more as you're presenting a model that the district can adopt, and so that everybody can kind of talk the same language as it comes to how the district would manage, right, or enterprise risk management application. However, also, as I look at this in the scenario you provided, the example you provided, that is, there are pockets within the district where, due to other, let's say, external requirements, like a regulatory requirement, this model already came into place kind of, naturally on its own, right? There's something that is regulated. The district management already applied strict processes to that. The district thought, the board thought that was important for the district to manage that, so that second line of defense was naturally defined, and obviously with the internal audit function already being present, like we had all those three lines present. I guess the other thing that I would look at is this provides us a common language that we can assign then to, so even individuals within the organization can talk, hey, which line of defense do I sit within, right? And how do I contribute to the whole? But also, if you look at on slide 5, the board as the governing body, thus has the ability to determine risk appetite and exercise oversight over internal controls. That means that, we have to recognize that controls and oversight over execution of controls has a certain amount of cost associated to it, right? And that would be, I guess, Kevin, my question, and sorry for the long-winded question, is the formal guidance that you have to have all 3 lines of controls present, or does the board, as the governing body, and its ability to determine risk appetite and exercise oversight, have that flexibility to say, okay, well, within this area, we don't think essentially the juice is worth the squeeze, so having well-defined first line of defense is appropriate, right? As implementing a second line of defense would maybe cost more than what the potential risk outcome is.
Let me see if I can hit all the points on there. I think you're absolutely right in that this is being presented as a method or as a model to speak a common language. That's an excellent point. Is that there are, like anything, there's a whole bunch of different ways to do things. This is being presented just as a resource. Available to the board and an opportunity to speak a common language when we're talking about everyone's roles and responsibilities within the organization. So that is absolutely 100% on the spot. As far as decisions to by the board to make or to include a second line or to not include a second line, I would agree with that as well. That is completely a board decision. And it makes total sense to me as well that if you find an area that, adding whatever mechanisms, activities, procedures, people, however you would decide to try to address a second line issue was greater than what your risk appetite was, the board could clearly, within its responsibilities, say, well, we don't want to implement a second line to address X, Y, and Z. I agree with that as well. Is that that there may be opportunities to do that. This model puts forth the second line as a best practice, as a consideration, so that management has that assurance. Well, not management is able to provide that assurance to the governing board that they have the first line day-to-day people working, but we also got another group of people that are available to assist and support those people and are thinking about continuously improving what those first line people are doing. If you can put that in, that's the fabulous way, and that's the preferred model to go about doing it. If you can't do it because of resources or because of your decision on risk appetite, that would clearly be within the board's prerogative as their role and responsibility on whether or not to address an issue and include a second line role. How'd I do? Did I get them all?
Yes, I appreciate that,
Okay.
Kevin. Thank you.
Okay.
Yeah, I guess, Kevin, I'd also would offer up, and for the rest of the committee, there is quite a bit of discussion taking place that with automation, that second lines are becoming very thin, and in some places maybe not necessarily needed. If automation, you have strong controls on the front end, that it can go right from management to internal audit to review it either via dashboards or other types of mechanisms. So that's certainly out there and certainly an area that we're also thinking about. So just a data point. I would also offer up, Kevin, that if the committee chose to, it could also empower internal audit to take a more active role in the establishment and guidance and consulting of the enterprise risk framework, since internal audit is at this point within the district probably the experts on risk and control. So although you wouldn't own it in the long run, you certainly could take a more active role in the short term, recommending choices of actions to take, areas that are thin, structural recommendations, skill set recommendations. So I just offer that up for the rest of the committee that is something that we could empower internal audit to do.
Yeah, I was just going to add that I think internal audit is in a a key position to identify those best practices that need to be addressed. 'Cause there are a lot of risks, but keying in on those areas that are significant risk, high risk, as it relates to enterprise risk management, that's where internal audit can bring some expertise just to identify those, to let management know, these are the areas that we think are key as far as the district goes in terms of their risk management process.
Thank you. Other questions from the committee? Seeing none, Mr. Stefanski, thank you.
Whoa.
Oh, I'm
So
sorry.
you had one. You don't have one?
No.
Okay, I have one.
Oh, okay, Madam Co-Chair, please, the floor is yours.
Well, when we talk about the first line and the second line and the risk, are we talking about the risk of liability, or are we also talking about the risk that we won't achieve our function or our objectives?
I think they're all risks.
Because that was part of
yeah.
what I thought we were trying to get at with enterprise risk. Like, we're not as much worried about, or we are worried about everything, but that we have to also focus on the risk that we won't actually educate our children.
Absolutely. I think all of it is the risk. I mean, and that's where the identification of what your risks are becomes so key, because you have compliance related risks, you have liability related risks, you have service delivery related risks, and whether or not you're successful in that service delivery. But I believe all of those are risks to the organization that require you to do your identification and then your evaluation and assessment of which ones are important, which ones are, the impacts and the likelihoods and all those things that go along into the assessment process. But it starts with the identification, which what you identify is clearly one of them, is that we don't achieve our core mission, which is to educate students.
Because I think that's, to me, that's the lens that we don't use enough, or as thoroughly as we should. And if this would help pivot us to that a little bit more in terms of our day-to-day, this could be, significant. And it strikes me as, I need to spend more time with it. I'm probably going to bug you with 8 million questions as I think of them, but it seems to me to mesh nicely with what we're doing with the student outcomes focused governance stuff.
Oh, sure, yes, absolutely.
Yeah, it's sort of another, and to those of you where we probably should spend a little bit of time at one of our meetings explaining to you what we're doing in terms of that process. But that's just to put a thought in that. The board is just a thumbnail, is in the process of embracing a program of governance that is focusing with laser-like precision, hopefully, if we get there, on a certain set of goals and outcomes that we have decided are the priorities for 5 years, and managing to those outcomes and trying to discipline ourselves to get less involved in the management, monitoring those outcomes and managing the heck out of the outcomes, and not so much involving in the day-to-day and the management function. So figuring out our lane and staying in it, but aggressively doing the monitoring piece and the managing piece. So and that's all in an effort to make sure we actually educate kids. And so this seems to be really aligned with that, although I have to think about it some more.
Yeah, and I agree with that. And to Kevin's initial point, though, I think we are continuing to focus on the risk, the liability risk as well. That's not going to go away.
No.
With the focus on student achievement and student outcomes specifically, we've got to do both. And I think what this is helping us do is narrow our focus a little bit more and be a bit more attentive in the area of student outcomes. That's at least what Carolyn and I spoke about when she wanted to bring this presentation to the committee today. And it's all wrapped in there. Yes, and I agree with you. We will find some time in the future to kind of give the committee an opportunity to hear from the administration about what that looks like as far as our governance model is concerned. So, yes, great idea, Madam Co-Chair. I am seeing no other questions. Mr. Daniel, want to make sure? Okay, seeing no other questions. Okay, thank you, Kevin, so much for this presentation. I believe you're
welcome.
up a little bit later, too, isn't it?
He's up next.
Oh, well, there you go, absolutely.
So this is the introduction to the OIA staffing progression framework. And Kevin, again, is going to lead us through that discussion. Thanks, Kevin.
Excellent. Yes, let me just get some notes up here. So yeah, as Kevin mentioned, I'm going to lead you through a little discussion of a staffing competency progression framework that we're working on in the Office of Internal Audit. And you might be asking yourself, well, why is the Office of Internal Audit doing a formal competency progression plan now? Why have we selected to do it now? And the answer to that question is that we believe that the Office of Internal Audit is at a maturity level, as well as the recently developed staffing plan that was put together for the Office of Internal Audit, dictated that we put together a more formal and intentional framework that would define competencies for the positions in the office, so that we can assess define those competencies and then assess our own competencies and see where our gaps were, as well as we wanted to create paths for folks that are in the Office of Internal Audit. And so all of our positions, for all of our positions in internal audit, we want to create like a kind of a career path or job path, whatever you'd like to call it. But we wanted to create paths within those frameworks and those competencies, just to give folks a kind of an idea of how they could progress throughout the office. And so we put together this plan. I'm going to go over a little bit about a couple of the details that go into the plan first, and then we'll walk through the structure of the plan that's been provided. First, the purpose of the plan. As I mentioned, it's designed to be an intentional effort to address our staffing plan. But a couple of things we want to make sure that we accomplished with it was that we wanted to articulate the competencies that are expected in the Office of Internal Audit for both our audit and non-audit professionals. We believe that by defining those and articulating those expectations of those competencies, to our team based on their positions within the office, they're more likely to achieve success, and they're more likely to achieve those expectations that we set out there. If we define them for them as objectively as we can, and you can never remove all the subjectivity, but try to be as objective as we can in defining and articulating those expectations to our team members. And then, as I mentioned, we wanted to build a path within the Office of Internal Audit for each of the team members, so that they could progress professionally throughout the office, should they so desire. Our default position as leadership is always going to be that we are going to push progression and we're going to try to push people forward. But we also understand that not everybody is interested in that. And so even though you're not interested in that, that's okay. We still want you to be the best you can possibly be. And so we'll work with you to achieve, competency levels for the position in which you're in. So understanding that not everybody is going to necessarily want to progress the way we would like them to, or that's our default position, this still gives them an opportunity to see a path within the Office of Internal Audit for them as they are part of our team. And then finally, we wanted to have some type of framework in order to guide and gauge our succession planning within the Office of Internal Audit. Do we have people that we think can progress and that will eventually fill different positions within our organization and within the Office of Internal Audit? And so we looked at it also as kind of a framework to help guide our succession planning and the activities related to that. Now, as far as framework content, where did we get the information that we put into our framework? Well, we didn't necessarily want to reinvent the wheel. Unfortunately, the Institute of Internal Auditors had already developed a competency framework for audit professionals. And so what we intend to do is we're going to adopt that IIA, Internal Audit Competency Framework, fully, which was one of the other items that was distributed to the group. And it looks like this, and it's a 7-page document, identifies different categories, knowledge areas, and competency levels. And so we're going to adopt this fully, but this wasn't, this didn't include all of the things that we felt we wanted to include in ours. And so what we did is we're going to adopt that fully, but then we're going to also, we've also defined a couple of additional areas that we think are important to us and that we want to make sure that our folks are following through, or at least aware of, that we want them to work towards. And so we'll adopt the one, we're going to add these items into it just of our own accord, so that we have a more full and robust item that meets our needs. Now, as far as the non-audit professionals and the content for the non-audit professionals, I'm going to tell you it was a lot more difficult than the audit professionals, simply because we had to do a little more research. And we found some models that were used in some local government organizations, and I think at least one university. So we kind of parsed some of their information and stole some of their information, some of their behavior characteristics, and some of the things that that they had. So it's kind of a mishmash of a number of different sources that we used to create the section for the non-audit professionals. Now I'm going to walk you through the structure here of what this looks like, so that you see what it looks like visually, and how it's laid out for each of the areas. So it's structured in such a way that, again, it's structured between audit professionals and non-audit professionals within the Office of Internal Audit. So we're going to adopt the IIA's full item, and then we're going to add these two these are categories within this framework, but we've added these knowledge areas within each of these categories, and then we've designed our own competency level behaviors and where we believe what should be demonstrated at each of those competency level behaviors. So that defines what the competencies are. We then take the competency levels and we break them out by each of the positions within the Office of Internal Audit. Again, these are the audit professionals and all the positions that are on our staffing progression, or not progression, but our staffing plan going into the future. So these represent both current positions that are in the Office of Internal Audit, as well as positions that we foresee in the future based on our staffing projections and our staffing plan going into the future. So we take the competency levels and we say, okay, if you're an audit intern, we expect you to be in the general awareness area. If you're going to be an executive director or the chief audit executive, well, we're going to obviously expect you to be in the expert area. And then all of these other positions are basically in the applied knowledge. And then we have experienced versus inexperienced positions. And so there is some differentiation, but this is intended to just tell folks, well, if you're in one of these positions, this is kind of the expectation that we want you working towards as on a competency level basis. So then what we do is we do a similar structure for the non-audit professionals. We do away with some of these bigger categories and essentially lead right into the knowledge areas. We call it the competency here, but this is basically the knowledge areas. We'll do the definition of what those knowledge areas are. And again, to be consistent, we're using the same levels of competency, the same three levels of competency: general awareness, applied knowledge, and expert. And so then we also, again, we'll put together, we put together the behaviors or the tasks or the abilities that you should be able to demonstrate within each of those competency levels. And we do that for the handful of the ones that we've identified for the non-audit professionals. And then similarly, we have considerably less non-audit positions within the Office of Internal Audit, but we do the similar structure in that we'll take each of the positions that are possible within the non-audit positions of the Office of Internal Audit, and depending on which position that is, we give an insight into where it is expected at what competency level you're expected to be performing at. And then finally, what we do is we take a few more characteristics. We add a few more characteristics to each of the audit positions. So it's not just the professional competencies that you demonstrate in the charts above, excuse me, but it's going to also be, these are some characteristics that we would expect at each of the audit positions. And so audit and non-audit positions, I'm sorry. So it is both, it's all positions within the Office of Internal Audit. And so down the left-hand side, you're going to have all of the positions within the organization. And then we make some descriptions of where we would expect your education level to be, where we expect your work experience levels to be, where we would expect your professional certification attainment would be. You don't have any, you're working toward a certification, you possess at least one certification, again, depending on the position that's in place and the position that you're in. And then finally, we have a column for IA competency framework. And this is intended to give each of the positions, an idea of, okay, on that framework, how much should you be able to be, just where should you be on that framework for competencies? So you will be, let's take, an inexperienced academic audit segment manager. You should be able to do 50% of the general awareness behaviors is where we're expecting you. Now, obviously, once you hit 50, we don't want you to stop. We want you to continue to progress. But we believe that on a everyday basis, you should be able to demonstrate 50% of the general awareness behaviors, again, with the idea that you're going to progress past that 70%. And then if you take an experienced one, well, we're expecting you to be able to do the general awareness behaviors and then approach 25% of the applied knowledge behaviors. And so these descriptions are intended to give the person in the position, a more precise idea of where they should be landing on the competency model. And we do that for each of the positions along the side. We define each of those. And then we also do that for each of the non-audit positions that are listed in our office. And so this is what the model looks like. Our next steps is to solicit feedback. We presented it to you. We wanted to just do this high level thing, not with the intention of debating any of the items that are on here or the content in this context, but wanted to provide it to you so you could see it. But we're also hoping to solicit your feedback over the next couple of months on the information that you see here. And that would be based on, if you have personal experience in your position of having done something like this and implemented something like this, where we might be going wrong, better presentation, whatever feedback you might be able to give us in relation to your experience, as well as just any other general feedback you might be able to give us on the document. And like I said, we're not necessarily intending to do that here today, other than to explain it to you, answer any general questions you might have about what we talked about, but then also over the coming months, solicit your feedback if you have any on the document and on the progress we've made. We can do that feedback in any number of ways. If you'd like, you can shoot us an email, and you can shoot emails to either of the Kevins, Kevin or me, and we'll take that into consideration. We'll run with that information. Or sometimes, it's a lot easier just to have a conversation with somebody than to put it in an email. So definitely we'd like to schedule telephone calls with folks if that's easier to do, to get that feedback or the critique on the product, so that we can then incorporate it, see where it fits, see how we can improve our ultimate end product. Our goal is to do that over the next couple of months, and then eventually have a finished product by January of 2022. And so that gives us plenty of time to organize telephone calls for you folks to think about it and offer any feedback you have, so that we can improve this item. And then, like I said, we hope to wrap it all up and have our final modifications done with a completed framework and a finished product by January of 2022.
Thank you again, Kevin. We do have some questions from the committee. Mr. Jordan, we see your hand. You have the floor, sir.
Thank you. Kevin, it's just good. I do like the IA's framework for the model. The one thing that I would suggest you take a peek at is the Protiviti Next Gen Auditor as a supplement to this, because it gets into a little more future skill sets for things like use of technology, both by the department and by the individual. So in the governance structure of internal audit and in its activities. And so there's a skill set definitions that go behind that. And there's a lot of information that Protiviti has on that. So just that suggestion to you, I think this is a great first start. And we have used this model ourselves in the past and just have built upon it.
Good. Thank you.
And I do think the IA, you can take their self-assessment. There's a self-assessment test that the individual auditors can take against this proficiency model. Then you can roll it up and get a report for the whole office with it. I think there's a cost involved. I'm not sure how much it is. It's nominal, but that's something you also may want to take a look at.
Okay, excellent. Thank you.
Sure.
Thank you, Mr. Jordan. Other questions from committee members?
I was just going to make one comment. I know in our firm, one of the things we like to do is to make our, kind of our evaluations more forward-looking than it is reverse-looking. We're not really trying to assess what happened in the past, but if you're trying to get them into different categories as far as their progression, you want to identify it on an individual basis. What key things do they need to do to be able to move to that next level? And it's more individualized than it is as just a one step, one level to another level.
Absolutely. Yeah, and that would definitely be considered in any kind of professional development that was needed. And you're 100% right in that it is. We would intend to take this information, but definitely apply it to the individual level. And it is not one size fits all, or not intended to be one size fits all. But yes, definitely apply it. Based on what the individual's needs are. Where they would like to progress, all of those things with that personal interaction.
Yeah, that's good.
Thank you, Mr. Grant. Mr. Dane? Okay. Kevin, I'm not seeing any other questions from committee members. Thank you again for this. We're looking forward to more work on it in the future. Remind committee members, if they'd like to get in touch with Kevin, please make sure to do so. You said the goal for completion for this would be in January of 22. Is that correct?
That's correct. So if we can get your feedback over the next couple of months, throughout October, November, even into December, we'll be running into holidays and all that stuff. So if we can get it over the next couple of months, that gives us an opportunity to either do additional research, as Mr. Jordan suggests, or what have you. I think we got plenty of time, but I'd rather we start those conversations sooner rather than later.
As this document kind of changes based on the additional research that you may do, will you send us updates as you feel is needed to the document?
We can certainly do that if we make significant changes, and would be looking to solicit that additional feedback. Absolutely, we'll definitely keep that in mind and provide that.
Certainly. Thank you, sir. Next on our agenda is the internal audit activity and dashboard report.
This too is from a Kevin, but this is me.
So,
I'll do this
okay,
one.
here we go.
So we'll start on page 3, and again, slow me down if you have questions or anything like that. But this dashboard includes fiscal year 22 going forward. I see I missed a typo on page 3, but it is fiscal year 22. The blue bar there, that's the data governance audit, and that is in the planning phase. The yellow bar under the audit section represents the general ledger and financial reporting. That's one audit project. The other one is federal and state grant compliance, and they're both in progress. And then the orange bar there is a report issued, the school building readiness audit. It's been completed and put into an audit at a glance report and sent that to the members prior to this meeting. The bar chart over in the project section, that's the OIA OPM update, so that's our procedure manual. All the procedures have been updated for this current year, so audit staff can work from that document. The reason we haven't finalized that is we're waiting to add the progression model in as an appendix to that document, so that will be finalized in January. Page 5, 6, and 7, same information we just went over, it's just in a different format. And then 8, 9, and 10 are the Chevron pages. Again, same information, just a different format. Page 11, there's no additions, deletions, or adjustments to the audit plan. Page 12, outstanding recommendations. We are certainly hoping that we'll have our follow-up information like we used to have it. We had a treasurer page, we had business and operations, and then a superintendent page, but we were running into problems getting that information to print out or an outcome of teammate, and it just didn't show properly. So we think we've corrected that issue, but we want to make sure that we have all the information up to date before we put that in. So look for that in October. Page 13 is a listing of external audit recommendations and the status of those. We did update the top line fiscal year 20 auditor of state. That was fiscal year 19. And then since our reporting period for each dashboard ends on the last day of the preceding month, and we had a September 2nd meeting and a September 23rd, our reporting period didn't end. It was still August 31st. So there was no additional activity for the current month or an update on the OIA project status. And then page 17 is just the Office of Internal Audit budget and current table of organization. So I'd be glad to take any questions if anybody had any on the dashboard.
Maybe this is just a clarification. On page 13, this says internal audit follows up on outstanding overdue issues quarterly. And I guess I don't remember seeing this report before, but this seems like it shows quite a few outstanding, or?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, that's correct. But what we're doing is we're working with management on a lot of these for the Council of Great City Schools HR review, transportation review. We've partnered with them because they had quite a few, as you can see, 15 and 17.
Right.
So there are reorgs going on. There's new staff in both those departments.
Okay.
Which is slowing us down a little bit there.
And then you'll just update these on future meetings?
That's
Okay,
correct,
Okay,
yes.
that's the one thing I just want to make sure.
And as they're updated, we'll try and highlight that as we come to the table to show you which ones have been highlighted.
Okay, thank you.
Certainly.
Other questions for Mr. O'Connor? Mr. Jordan, we don't want to leave you out. Do you have any questions for Kevin?
Yeah, I was trying to between mute and unmute.
Yes,
Kevin,
sir.
of the issues that are past due, how many of those are high in nature? Do you know off the cuff?
I don't have that, but I can definitely get that to you and send that to the committee members.
Yeah,
I'll separate those by high, moderate, and low so you can see all of them.
That's fine. Yeah, I might suggest you might consider adding that page going forward. That might be helpful.
Okay. We will do that.
Thank you.
Certainly.
All right, seeing no further questions, we're going to move to section 2 of our agenda. That is risk management. We have a major operational risk report or presentation.
That's correct.
Okay.
And that'll be with Maurice Oldham.
Good afternoon, Mr. Oldham.
Good afternoon, sir. If I may, I'll share my screen.
Please do.
Give me a second. I have some it's not showing. I apologize. It's share. It's interesting. Okay. Let me close and reopen. For some reason, it's not showing on my screen. All right. I apologize for that delay.
There we go.
All right, good afternoon. Thank you for the opportunity to come before you today. Chair Ragland and Madam Chair Beckley, thank you for this opportunity, and committee members. This is a presentation to talk about major risk, operational risk that's within Business and Operation Department. And on the call I have with me and some of my team members, should there be any questions that come forward. What I'd like to start off with, as always, is what our business operation objective is to provide timely, customer-driven support to ensure that proper environment is provided while managing the efficient use of all resources. We should demonstrate professional integrity in all situations and work to ensure that all students have a safe and adequate opportunity to learn. Today, I want to focus in on four department areas: Office of Buildings and Grounds, Office of Food Service, Office of Transportation, and the Office of Safety and Security. In Buildings and Grounds, we focus on three operational risk areas: people, facilities, and resources. When I think of people, we think about the staff, the risk to the internal staff. When we think about the district resources and facilities, we think about the district assets, people that occupy the facilities. And then when we think about the resources, we're looking at making sure we have enough resources to cover the workload demand that comes forward. Operational risk, when we think of people, we think about the safety hazards in confined spaces where our staff work throughout the buildings. We think about the skilled trades people work in confined spaces, looking at air handlers, working with stored energies in the form of electricity, pressurized systems, and working from high heights. Those are some of those safety people risks that we see as risks within our operation staff. When we think of the facilities staff as well, we think about the biological hazards such as virus, indoor air quality, pest control. We think of the physical hazards such as fire, floods, and machinery-related hazards and temperature extreme. Also, we think about chemical hazards. We deal with a lot of chemical hazards within our operations of Buildings and Grounds. We have stored gases, we have flammable materials as well. We look at risks and also making sure that we address them from a district and facilities asset, premature failure of the district assets. We're thinking of, when you think about that, you think about all the mechanical equipment that's within our organization. And then we look at also the risk of non-compliance with regulatory requirement. Within our Buildings and Grounds operation, there's many dated compliance issues that we have to address. And we're making sure that we stay on top of those. Otherwise, we put the district at risk, and we also put at risk of failure within our equipment in our organization if we don't make sure we stay on top of those compliance issues. Resource is an operational risk as well. And when we think about the resources, we look at what is the work organization, what is the workload demand? Do we have the resources or are we structured in a manner to be able to address those workload demands? And that can create a risk when you don't have that, because what it does, it impacts deferred maintenance, impacts preventive maintenance. It impacts looking at planned versus unplanned maintenance. So we look at those workload demands from that perspective. We look at one of the risks could be potentially limited resources to meet those demands. Limited skilled trade resources in the local market. What you're finding as positions come open in the market, there's a limit in skilled trade resources, and finding with the new technology of individuals or staff being able to meet those demands moving forward. So you try to do some things creative with that, of growing your own. And then you look at the limited ability to attract staff. So then how do we attract those staff members? Because normally in some cases, when you're talking about the skilled trade, individual who's out in the market in the private sector, it's a whole different level of pay scales and different level to attract staff to public sector. So we have to be creative in our recruitment of attracting those staff members to our organization. Some of the mitigation strategies that we look at for as people, we've in Buildings and Grounds established goal of 24-hour response time to priority one work. And when we look at priority one work for us is work that has a potential to close school, or it poses a threat or causing harm to a person. And so we make that become priority one work, and our goal is to respond to those and address those matters within 24 hours. We also look at safety training for our internal staff so that as we work with those gases and those safety issues I mentioned earlier, that we're training our staff through professional development and being able to make sure we're working in a safe manner. And then we continue to partner with talent and acquisition to recruit skilled staff as we move forward. In the facilities realm, we've established a goal of 30-day completion of regulatory required maintenance tasks. So within that 30-day, and as they come in schedule, our goal is to making sure we complete those tasks within 30 days. Also, we have a technician daily that's on standby on a rotation to respond to building emergencies during non-business hours. Because in our operations, it's a 24-hour operation, and we have those risks of things potentially happen in non-business hours. So we have a technician that's on standby to address those issues. As resources, we continue to evaluate and monitor our current resources to meet the demand request, and if necessary, we will request additional funding as needed. And we do that through several ways, through our budgeting process, and also we have, if we have needed different resources throughout the course of the year, there's a process internally that we deal with that throughout the district. We right source external resources to supplement the workforce. We look at utilizing external contractors when needed to be able to help supplement our workforce. And then we also leverage our technology to be able to communicate and address issues with our customers, with our technicians through using iPads, opportunity for them also, if they need to look up items on site, they can go through the iPad for manuals and those type of information, so they don't have to always come back to here at 17th to our main hub to gather information. So we try to leverage technology as that comes forward. Office of Food Service, some of the operation risk in food service is supply chain disruption. Supply chain disruption we see in this day and time with the COVID situation is becoming a concern. What we do in food service to try to mitigate those risks is we constant communication with our suppliers. We maintain in-house inventory levels, and we also maintain emergency meal kits on site should we run into a supply chain issue from that perspective. Another operational risk that we have is COVID-19 illness and quarantines with our staff. What we do is try to hire as many subs as possible for us. And then also we look at staff to maintain inventory of emergency meals as another way to deal with quarantine should staff have to go on quarantine. We also try to look at our staff and adjust staff to work across different school sites when practical. Food safety. Food safety is a risk because, again, as we all know in food, we have to make sure that we're providing food in a safe manner. All our levels 3 sites, kitchens, which is our secondary schools, staff has received 16 hours of serve safe certification. And then also at our level 1 sites, kitchens in the elementary schools, we have a person who's in charge of food safety that has received food safety training. And then equipment failure is also a risk from the food service standpoint from our freezers and food service refrigeration equipment. And those equipment is on a preventive maintenance schedule that we make sure we take care of on an annual basis as well to keep that piece of equipment up and running. Office of Transportation, routing is a major risk in the Office of Transportation. Transportation nationally, as we all know, is a concern with staffing, with routing, with all the shortages nationally. Some of the things with some of the changes that we made as a risk is we had to increase some of our bus ride times. More stops have been added to routes, and special needs students have been integrated into our Gen Ed bus routes to support moving more students on buses. Some of the mitigation strategies we looked at and continue to look at is identify tier 1 runs that potentially run late, that we can make adjustments to those routes to be able to streamline the routes and the ride time. Looked at ridership surveys to help reduce bus stop routes, allow for quicker time. And what I mean by that is we route all eligible students within transportation Columbus City Schools. We route those students, and then we do student counts, because not all students, once you route them, will show up for the bus ride. And so therefore, as we make those route counts and do those surveys, we're able to right size and adjust those routes as we move forward. And then we work in conjunctions and collaborate with building leaders at the building level to identify students who are not riding the bus, so we can make those adjustments for efficiency. Those are some of the strategies we use for routing. Bus driver staffing levels have a negative impact on our customer service. On an average, we've been running 70 to 80 bus driver call-offs per shift. And on any given shift, currently we have 15 to 20 supervisors that's driving buses. Mitigation strategy, we're working close with a talent acquisition team that's partnering with the vendor to increase driver training applications. Labor Relation OPSI agreed to a MOU for $250 referral for our current staff members, bus drivers, to become advertisement agents out there to bring people, to encourage them to apply. And then also we're reaching out and partnering with adult education to assist with CDL permit education, to try to encourage individuals to come on board, and then to try to educate them, because there's many steps of the CDL process that individuals have to pass in order to become a school bus driver. Our call center call volume, the first 8 days of school, the call center volume was over 23,000 calls. Only 14% of those calls were able to be successfully answered due to that volume. 41% of the 7,500 calls, and excuse me, in the past 8 days of school, the call center received 7,500 calls, and 41% of those calls was successfully answered. Some of the mitigation strategy we're looking to do for our call center mitigation is add 4 additional call center rep positions that's been approved. Also, 2 additional dispatchers to be able to help communicate with our buses and work in conjunction with our call center. Then a strong emphasis has been placed on returning phone calls to our parents. And then bus bulletin has increased from dispatch to inform parents of any issues going on with the buses throughout. And we'll continue to monitor that and try to improve and look at other mitigation strategies as we move forward. Driver recruitment, and the recruitment part of the mitigation strategy, it started this summer. We've, in the training academy, has interviewed 373 bus driver applicants. Of that, 135 are working on obtaining their permit. 31 are in credentialing phase. 22 are currently in training, and there are currently we have 560 routes covered every shift. With the 70, 80 call-offs per shift, we need to have 650 active qualified drivers as we continue to move forward. Driver recruitment mitigation, bus driver surveys sent out to our bus drivers to understand drivers, how they feel about their work and how we can make some internal adjustments for that. Management has planned to engage transportation staff to help create retention. And as driver numbers increase through our recruitment process, we will always continue to look at our routes to see how we can shorten those results of routes. So it's a less stressful day for our drivers as well as our students that's riding our buses. Often safety and security always focus on the safety of our students. And some of the things we've done this year in safety and security to work towards improvement of our students. And for safety, we've added 20 additional safety and security specialists to the organization. One additional safety and security added to each high school. Safety and security specialists assigned to all middle schools. Also, security staff required to visit elementary schools weekly and when requested. And each region has been assigned a safety and security supervisor to help navigate issues and concerns and procedures as the protocols. The first 10 days, all schools, at the schools, our safety security team went through and also checked door alarms, checked and replaced any that need to be replaced at school. We did it throughout the course of the summer. The first 10 days, we make sure we went back to reassure that, make sure all visitor management systems are up and running. Also, all of our safety security staff received training on restorative practices. And the evacuation, the reverse evacuation lockdown was conducted per the Ohio revised codes, and all schools are in compliant. And then also the emergency management test was completed as I pushed one of two. Traditionally it's one, but this year you do one at the beginning of the year, and then you have to have a second one done by end of December. And so we're in compliance at this point. One of the two has been completed, and we'll be completing that second one prior to December throughout the district. Safety, school safety collaboration, school safety plans are revised and renewed for the school year. That's 22, that's in progress. Our safety security team is working with the building level, updating those plans. Plans are in place, but we're updating those plans, and it's just a practice that we utilize. Active shooter aggressive online training is taking place in progress at all the schools. School safety discussion with school administrators is constantly in communication, collaborating on how we can always improve the work that we do. We're looking to revise the employee operation procedure manual and the pocket guide. That's in progress. Lockdown active shooter information cards have been issued. Safety security team members meet with athletic staff and building staff weekly to discuss safety plans, revised safety plans that's related to athletic events or any after school programs that's going into school. And then also safety security communicates with the police, Columbus PD, the police precincts on events within that school area, but as well as we communicate with Columbus Police Department with our contacts, informing them what's going on with our games. So we have a great relationship with them on that as well. So that's some of the things that we're doing in operation to mitigate risk and strategy that we have within the organization. We'll continue, there's many risks, but these are the ones I want to focus in on because it's impacting learning environment, impacts the work that we do to maintain our facilities and buildings. And any questions I can answer this time, I will.
Thank you, Mr. Odom. I'm sure we have several questions here. Mr. Jordan, I can't see you. Is your hand raised?
No questions, but Maurice, I thought that was well done. Very, very informative.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Jordan. Madam Co-Chair.
Okay, yeah, I do think it was a great report, and it really gave us a sense of, among other things, Maurice, what you're up against. But I'm reflecting on the committee diet conversation that we had as part of our training. And one of the evils of committees is that we end up causing more work for staff. And so I'm thinking about the effort that you spent to put this all together, and I'm trying to think of the purpose of it and what we're achieving by it. And so I was starting to conclude in my mind that, you know, this is one of those examples of, should we be asking you to spend this time and energy, put this together, and what's the benefit of that time? But then I thought about our line 1, line 2 discussion. And so it occurred to me that, and this might be something to think about going forward, it would be more beneficial if we were getting a line 2 sort of report, which says, these are our strategies, this is how often we're implementing them, these are the results, these are the, so rather than this is what we're doing, an analysis of compliance with what we're doing, or whatever that role of the line 2 within an organization would be, rather than just this is what we're doing. It might be helpful And I'm not sure if this is the right place or not, but just let's think about that, because I don't know that it's the best use of Maurice's staff time, as nice as the report was, to come in and just give us this overview. Because it's not really, I mean, it's nice to know, I appreciate it, but I'm not sure that we should be doing this. And I had the thought last time when we had James Barnes do his report, and somebody, I can't remember who was the other one.
Mr. Trevino.
Yeah, like, so let's think about what's our purpose in asking these people to do the reports, and might there be a better way to do it that actually helps us advance some of these other goals?
And I think the timing's perfect because at the next committee meeting, we'll be approving or reviewing the annual activity calendar.
So we
It
can
has
talk
these
about it then?
people- Yeah.
Okay.
It has these people come and present periodically throughout the year, and then you can set what you're looking for in those reports. And I think that will go far, yes.
Okay. So, because I don't think this is the place to start asking a lot of questions about, well, what are you doing about this, and what about this? I mean, I have a lot of things I'd like to ask about, but I don't think that's the purpose of this report.
Well, I think
So,
the report was framed as operational risks. I think any one of those areas could present tremendous challenges for us if we, if we have an issue there. I mean, we're already seeing, we had several thousand calls for transportation for the first
those
10 days of
numbers were
school.
just so sobering.
And, our response to some of those was pretty low. Are there some things that we can do from the Office of Internal Audit to help? I know we're getting more staff involved with the call center to be more responsive, but is that just going to be temporary staff, right? We're looking at the fact that this thing is eventually going to smooth out, and we may dramatically decrease our number of calls to the call center. We also have software that's coming online. So what are some things that we can do to help to kind of, tighten some of those things up? The question I did have, you talked about safety and security, Maurice, and I've thought about some of the issues that we have had in our athletic events to start the school year off. And we do active shooter training inside the buildings, but we've had some incidents where shots have been fired in our athletic events that are after school. And are we training children, at least, on best practices when there is an active shooter in the vicinity of our athletic events? Because for me, some of the videos that we've seen when things have been going on, we may want to try and show children what to do to best keep themselves safe if something happens, unfortunately, at one of our athletic events. And I don't know if that's something that we do, but that was a question that kind of came to me as you were going through the report.
Thank you, Chair Ragland, for that question. I'm going to ask Chris Ward to help respond to that.
Board Member Ragland and committee. One of the things we do each week is we provide a site map for those teams who are playing. And on that site map, it shows them where the relocation sites are should something bad happen. And so part of the weekly team meeting is to identify where safety and security are staged throughout the event, and also where should each team go. And that information is discussed with both teams, with coaches, so that they are aware. So we do try to take the necessary precaution to ensure the safety of the students and those participating in the athletic events.
Thank you for that, Mr. Ward. Other questions from committee members? Seeing none, okay. Thank you very much, Mr. Oldham, and your team for getting this report back together with us. Really appreciate it.
Thank you, sir.
Okay, Mr. O'Connor, it seems as if we have exhausted our agenda. I do want to make the announcement that the date and time of our next meeting is going to be October 28th, 2021 at 3:30 PM here in this dwelling. Is there a question, Madam
Yeah.
Co-Chair?
At some point, I think during the dashboard discussion, we talked about the school building readiness review
Yes,
and the audit at a glance.
yes.
I think that I think we should put, or I'd like to suggest that you follow up in the wake of the letter we received from the nurses
Yes.
and figure out, as a result of that and coming to our attention, what we're doing in response to that, and then consider a school opening audit. I mean, I don't know who decides that or how we do it, but I would think that the superintendent would appreciate that follow-up.
Yep.
You know,
Correct.
the purpose of this should be, in order to accomplish it, should be to follow
Yes.
up on that.
I agree. I'll pass that
That's-
along to Carolyn and have her touch base with necessary people.
Thank you.
Absolutely.
Is there any other unreadiness? Seeing none, do I have a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
I'll second.
Thank you. It's been moved and properly seconded. All in favor, please respond by saying aye.
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 All right, and none opposed. Thank you very much for your attention to all of these matters, and we look forward to seeing you on October 28th.
Great.
We are
Take care,
adjourned.
everyone. Thank you.
Thank you.
Take care.
Thank you.
Take care.
Bye.